I'm Kara Infante, and this is Bookish Flights. In each episode, I chat with one bookish guest as we take some time to sample and savor the pairing recommendations from their bookish flight. We hope to give you suggestions to cultivate your TBR list and nurture your leisure time through books. In today's episode, I am chatting with Katie Izard. Katie is an award-winning author and speaker who has helped bring transformation to Charlotte in homelessness, housing, and mental health. Her memoir, The 100-Story Home, has been featured on Katie Couric Media, NPR, and The Today Show, inspiring people to be change makers in their communities. In 2019, she released A Good Night for Mr. Coleman, a children's book written to encourage kids to dream big and do good. Katie's newest inspirational nonfiction book, The Last Ordinary Hour, was written about her husband's struggle with rare disease to help others facing loss and uncertainty in their lives. Katie is the recipient of a 2017 Christopher Award. In the past 15 years, she has helped raise over $75 million for homelessness and mental health in Charlotte, North Carolina, where she has lived for over 30 years. Katie and her husband have 4 daughters, including a set of twins, and are happily expanding that family to 2 son-in-laws, a grandson, and more on the way. Welcome to the show, Katie.
Thanks, Kara. So glad to be with you.
Thanks for coming this morning. Well, that is a super impressive bio.
Oh, thanks.
Why don't you start by telling us a little bit more about who you are?
Thanks, Kara. Who am I? What a broad question. I am probably first as a mom, a grandma, a friend, an author, a speaker, a teacher, a coach. And I've kind of reinvented myself maybe 6 times. I think if you asked me that question 15 years ago, I would have said I was a graphic designer, but I ended up in 2007 quitting my job and going to work in homelessness and nonprofit world. And that really is the basis for my first book, The 100-Story Home. And I think my life really took a wild left turn, right turn, somewhere off the path that I thought back in 2007, and something I never expected in my life, but I really am grateful for it. It's opened the doors to so many things, from working in the nonprofit world to being a community advocate and volunteer, to now writing, speaking about that work. And I teach others how to write books, because it's a very long journey. So since we're listening, we have a lot of listeners who love books. I love helping people write and figure out how to publish, because that was a whole different long journey for me.
Yeah, that's beautiful. And I was going to ask you that, if these changes in your life, if you knew that they were going to be coming, or if it was just completely like something just fell in your lap and you're like, I have to take this opportunity and run with it.
100% unexpected. I write about the idea of a whisper, about these ideas, maybe that little voice that comes to you that tells you to do something that feels very inconvenient and unexpected, and might be uncomfortable because it has nothing to do with what you're currently doing in your life or what you thought you might be doing. But at the same time, I think those whispers are very insistent. And once they start and they don't let you go, then you have to decide, well, am I going to listen, or am I going to pretend I never heard them? So I think that is what started it for me in 2007. I know you like to ask people, is there a book that changed your life? Well, I read a book in 2007 called Same Kind of Different as Me. And it wasn't the book that changed my life. It was one of the authors, Denver Moore. I ended up meeting him, and he asked me 4 questions that changed my life forever. And I realized, while I'd been volunteering at a soup kitchen serving soup was not going to solve homelessness. Homes would. And so I ended up quitting my job and going to work for that soup kitchen. And we started our first housing program. So that was all a whisper. It was a whisper that I should invite them to Charlotte to speak, which led to him asking me those questions, which began an insistent whisper that I couldn't not do something about it, that I was going to have to quit my job and go try to do something about it. And then from there, it's been whispers of all kinds of things, including writing a book, which I had no plans to do. So it's all a lot of different twists and turns in the path, but it does feel like it's exactly the path I was always meant to be on.
Yeah. It sounds like it's created a really full life for you, which is beautiful.
It has. And I think that was part of it. And at the time, I was probably around 44 years old. And I had four beautiful kids. I had been a mom. I was a community volunteer. I loved my design work, but I also at the same time felt like something was missing. I had a restlessness for a life that I wanted, but I couldn't name or explain what it would be. I just knew I had that restlessness that whatever I was doing, a small business owner, and it was not what I was supposed to be doing. I just didn't know how to find that path.
Yeah.
And whispers are what led me to that path. And I do feel like this is what I was meant to do. So.
Yeah. How old were your kids at that time?
Well, let's see. Well, if I can do the math quick, when I was 44, they were probably, I was facing empty nesting. So that I have four
Okay.
daughters, two girls, and then a set of twins. And so the twins were probably in middle school when that was
Okay.
starting. My older two were already in high school and starting to approach college. And I was starting to see the writing on the wall that I wasn't going to be as busy.
Yeah.
Um, Even though I had a full roster of clients and a graphic design business, it wasn't fulfilling in the way that I wanted it to be. I just couldn't quite write the script for myself of what that was. And those whispers began writing the script. So.
Yeah. Well, that's why I was asking because I was like, that's very impressive. I imagine that season of your life was very busy, but that you were still able to hear those whispers in the busyness.
Yeah, and I think at some point, if anyone listening has had this experience, I think at some point the whispers become really loud. I had someone call it a cosmic 2x4 shouting that you really, when you go to sleep at night, you really can't hear anything else or think about
Yeah.
anything else. And I think when it reaches that point, you really are at the crossroads of what you have always done and what might be possible. And so, yeah, it's very uncomfortable to think that you're going to take that leap. Um, I don't know what gave me the courage to do it because I was totally unqualified to do anything about housing or homelessness. I don't really know why I listened, but I think probably just because it was so insistent. And even though it felt crazier not to try. So
Yeah.
why not try?
Yeah, absolutely. And did you have some mentors along the way then that helped guide you, or did you just jump in with 2 feet and learn as you went?
I think both. I don't think anything happens, in a vacuum by yourself, but I
Sure.
certainly the director of that soup kitchen was Dale Molinex, and he certainly was a great guide. A lot of the people who were on staff there were great guides and also knew about this work that we were trying to do called Housing First. We started going to other cities and seeing what they were doing, and then always along the way, I don't know, I found a lot of guides and mentors and books, that's for sure. I did a lot of reading. I used to only read quirky fiction, I guess, to escape and just get lost in a great story. And I started reading a whole lot more nonfiction, people who were doing housing work, people who were doing fundraising, people who were working with in homelessness, mental health. It just opened a whole new path of books I wasn't even sure existed. And so I did a lot of reading to try and learn. I didn't have time to go back to school and get a degree, so I needed to jumpstart my own education
Yeah.
in other ways. So, and hundreds of people, of course, helped. We eventually raised $10 million and built Charlotte's
Wow.
first permanent supportive housing. So, an apartment building that housed over 100 chronically homeless men and women. And that's the
Wow.
basis of the 100-story home. It's the idea not only about providing change and understanding that homelessness is solved by homes, but it's really told more in a novel type way, where you're storytelling and it's asking the reader to think about what might be calling you, whether it's homelessness, whether it's some issue that's keeping you awake at night. I think something's imprinted on everybody's heart
Yeah.
that they're meant to do. And that book is really designed to not only talk about what happened in Charlotte, but really ask you the question, what's calling you?
I'm going to have to pick that up because one of my questions was going to be, so for someone like us that maybe is not involved in this world at all, is there something simple is maybe not the right word, but something that we could start doing that would help? right? Because I think we all see homelessness, but it's what's going to benefit them the most.
Yeah, that's such a great question. And I think first, just understanding that homelessness, while soup and soup kitchens and day services are really kind, they're really not going to solve the problem.
Yeah.
Homelessness is solved by one thing, it's solved by homes, and it really is linked to affordable housing.
Okay.
So when we have rising prices in communities that are very successful, that is driving, homelessness. If you're really just trying to do something kind for one person. I tell the story in the 100 Story Home about a man, Eugene Coleman, who's also the name of the children's book, A Good Night for Mr.
Oh,
Coleman.
yeah.
It's
Okay.
on his true story. And he's someone that I met that we ended up housing. And I learned a lot from him. You talk about mentors along the way. I think Eugene Coleman was a mentor for me just to understand. He was someone who had a job and, he never expected to be homeless. He was a supervisor in a factory and he ended up getting injured on the job, and that injury led to a devastating back injury. He couldn't work, and he
Oh,
lost his
yeah.
job. He lost his car. He lost hope, and he ended up on the streets for almost 20 years. And
Wow.
he would say the one thing people could do was just remember that he was a human. That he
Yeah.
said would pass him so many times, like he was invisible, like you couldn't see him. And just someone looking him in the eye and nodding, and they don't even have to give money, but just remembering that that's a human that you're passing on the street, and restoring their dignity and humanity just in the 10 seconds that you look them in the eye and smile. He would say that was life changing, and some days was what he needed to get through the day to remind him that he would have the courage to keep moving forward and hope that one day his situation would change. I
Yeah.
know people do blessing bags. Sometimes they carry around things, with children, you could make bags that have water and crackers and, a clean pair of socks. And so if you see someone and you carry them in your car, you can hand that out if you feel uncomfortable giving money. But sometimes just smiling and nodding at someone's humanity might be what they need to get through the day.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing because it's definitely because my kids have started asking questions.
Of course.
And so I'm like, well, how can I show them, right, to be, and obviously picking up your book would be a great one, but how to be good in this world for them.
Yeah, and that's what so the 100 Story Home and A Good Night for Mr. Coleman are written so that they can be parent-child reads.
I
So
love that.
obviously it's a deeper dive for the 100 Story Home for the parent. And A Good Night for Mr. Coleman is a simplification, but also based on a true story. It has the pictures of the real Mr. Coleman in the back. And the story is about one little girl who goes to a soup kitchen with her mom, very similar to how my 4 daughters used to go with me to the soup
Yeah.
kitchen, asking the questions of how this nice person could not have a place to live, and then deciding that she would do something about it. And she has a lemonade stand and raises money to give to an effort like More Place in the book. And this is based on a true story because when we were raising that $10 million, we had some kids who did a lemonade stand and sent us $105. So
Wow.
it's a true story. And along with all the donors on the wall at More Place, we had $1 million gifts and we had $10,000 gifts, but the names of the children who gave the $105 are on the wall as well. So I just
Oh, I love that.
um, trying to let kids understand the humanity behind homelessness and also that one person can make a difference.
Yeah. Oh, that's beautiful. Actually, this summer I had put out a summer reading club, I called it, because I wanted families to feel like they could connect to one another. And so we, of course, had a book flight in there, but the book flight included an adult read that would match with maybe like a middle grade YA and then also a picture book. So depending on
Yeah.
ages of your children or grandchildren. And so that way you could talk about books that were in similar topics or similar veins
Yes.
and have a little miniature book club
I
related
love
to
that.
that. So this would
Well,
have been a perfect fit.
I know. Well, I love this. And then I have a new book coming out next year called Trust the Whisper. You'll explain that. And it's 20 true stories of people who listen to their whispers and what
Oh,
happened. And I'm doing a children's book that goes with it called Grace Heard a Whisper.
yeah.
Um, so I love this idea that a parent or a grandparent can be reading a book with the similar themes to discuss with the child, and you each really can understand it on your level. So mine are picture books. I haven't gotten into YA yet, but who knows? Maybe that's next. So.
Yeah. Oh, that's beautiful. Well, thank you. You've like given us some matches already, so this is perfect. Um, so when did you get your first whisper to write the book?
Yeah, I know. And it was a whisper. I mean, we were finishing More Place, and I had all these stories that felt miraculous because we raised that $10 million in 2008 in a
Wow.
banking city when everyone had lost hope and lost jobs and lost, just their own personal, financial struggles. So it really was very unlikely that we'd be able to raise $10
Yeah.
million for something like a homeless, project, an apartment building. Yet we did. And I first started out thinking, well, I want to collect those stories. I want to remember them, and I don't want these to be lost. So maybe I'll just write it down. So I think it was 2010, New Year's Eve, going into 2011. I made a promise to myself that I was going to write something longer than an email. And in college, I loved to write, and I had thought, oh my gosh, I would someday love to write the great American novel, but I didn't have anything to say at 18, 19 years old. And
Yeah.
so here I was 30 years later, 40 years later, and I had something that I wanted to say. So I started writing them down, and my husband, it took me a year. I collected it, and I was doing other things at the time. So it was my hobby to be writing this. And I let my husband read it kind of at the end of 2011. And he said, well, honey, it's not a page turner. And which which was kind. Brene Brown
Yeah.
says, be clear is kind. So he was being clear. But it did start, and the next 4 years I took writing classes, and I tried to understand. I'd always been a reader. I loved reading, but I really hadn't read like a writer. I didn't understand book structure and story
Sure.
structure, and I hadn't thought about it in that way. So I spent 4 years rewriting that book and trying to make it the best book I could be. And then I thought, well, if I just write a great book, I'll get a book contract. And I don't know if you ever talk about publishing on this, but it doesn't work that way. It does not matter if you write a good. It has a lot more to do with how many followers you have and that sort of thing, and getting an agent. And it was very um, tough process. But I ended up self-publishing it because I thought, well, if I've spent 5 years writing it, I'm not just going to let it languish on my computer. So I
Yeah.
figured it all out, and people started reading it, and it ended up getting that, as you mentioned, the 2017 Christopher Award for inspirational nonfiction, which I think is very unusual for a self-published book.
Wow.
So from there, it got picked up by HarperCollins. So I did get a book contract on it. Um,
Okay.
so I didn't see any of that coming. I was really just trying to collect those stories. I called myself almost an accidental author for years. But what I did find out in the process is that I love to write, that I think writing is the world's greatest puzzle. You have to take all these pieces and figure out how to put them together in a way that is compelling and keeps the pages turning. But also, I write only nonfiction, so you can't make it up. It has to be true. So you have to
Yeah.
take the pieces and put them together in a way that keeps the reader's attention and keeps them going. So then I ended up, writing The Last Ordinary Hour, and then now I'm working on I've finished the manuscript that'll be published next year. So, but it all started with a whisper to write it down so that those
Yeah.
stories would be lost. So.
Well, I admire your perseverance of spirit there to keep with that project for 5 years and keep mulling it over.
Well, I thought, gosh, it can't be as hard as building an apartment building and raising $10 million. But I will tell you, Kara, I think it might be. I think writing and publishing books is harder than building apartment buildings, because it's
Yeah.
just you're constantly kind of banging up against closed doors, first trying to find an agent, and then trying to, get a publisher's attention. And all of that can be very frustrating. So, which is why now I teach publishing classes. I teach both the business of publishing, what that looks like, helping emerging authors or aspiring writers understand that. And also, if once you decide that, well, I'm not going to get that book contract, then I teach a self-publishing class on the 11 steps that it takes to publish a book and how to get your words in the world.
Yeah. And where do you teach these classes at?
So I teach them on a site that I started called womenfaithstory.com.
Okay.
And I teach workshops, retreats, and virtual. And the workshops and retreats are everything that really came out of the last ordinary hour, kind of more soul work. I thought I had a really good understanding of God and the world, and then my husband had a rare disease crisis, and it really changed what I needed to find in my faith. And that book became my study of how to understand what had happened to us.
Yeah.
And I now teach workshops and lead retreats for people who are maybe looking for their next chapters and struggling with the current storyline in their life.
Yeah. Well, we'll include that link in our show notes. I would love to have people
Thanks.
be able to find you there.
Yeah,
Um,
thank you.
and that sounds like, right, we're all here trying to navigate life, and
Yes.
difficult things are going to happen, and difficult things are going to get placed in our lap. And it's amazing that you kind of, it makes you dig deeper, right? And figure out, you have to make sense of the world again after something like that happens.
Well, and I think to me, it's not if something's gonna
Yeah.
happen to you, it's when. Because I think that's when whatever that thing is, whether it's an unexpected death or an unwanted diagnosis, or maybe, a divorce that you didn't see coming in your life, the 3 Ds, right? Death,
Hmm.
divorce, diagnosis. Something like that is going to happen to each of us. And if you don't have a strong, I think, a faith system, and whatever that looks like to you, I think it's just as broad as believing in yourself and something bigger.
Yeah.
Um, that it's tough to get up when you get knocked down and you have no way to get up. You really need some sort of framework and support system. And that's what I went looking for as I was writing The Last Ordinary Hour. It was just my own personal journaling project, but I started reading voraciously I needed books that were going to help me make sense of this world and navigate it and know that I was not the only one.
Yeah.
And that book also, which I didn't think I would ever publish, but I did, um, includes the work of over 35 poets, theologians, writers who were struggling with these issues of grief and loss and death. And I read books on widowhood because my husband's rare disease, I was pretty sure I was going to be a widow
Yeah.
very early. And we are, very amazingly, he is still here. And many years past what people thought. He has a disease called spontaneous coronary artery dissection, which
Okay.
means the arteries in his body can split at any time, causing
Yes.
a heart attack, aneurysm, or stroke. So you
Okay.
really are walking around day to day, almost like this ticking time bomb, and you're not knowing what it's going to happen. And doctors are very kind. Again, clear as kind, but they tell you that there's no research. They don't know if it's going to happen again. And they're they they're kind, but there's not much they can tell you. So you
Yeah.
really are living with this diagnosis of radical uncertainty, and which we know when you're first diagnosed with it, you think, oh my gosh, we're the only ones. And then you
Yeah.
finally look up and say, oh, we're part of this much broader world where people are struggling and dealing with things. And what do you do? So
Yeah. And I imagine there's not like a diagnostic tool they can use
no,
to,
and that would be so nice, Kara.
yeah.
But no, I kept Googling for answers. I was sure there was a doctor somewhere, somehow, who was gonna tell us the pill or the protocol or the test or the plan, and there was nothing. So
Yeah.
here we were, two very type A control freak type people with an
Yeah.
uncurable, unsolvable disease. So um,
Wow.
that that really was a different kind of walk to figure out what does that mean when that happens in your life, and then really just understanding it was our time, it was our turn to walk through something and find faith and hope despite the circumstance. So
Yeah. Wow. Well, I commend you for writing about that in such a public way as well.
I commend my husband for being okay with me publishing it because he is a super private person. So
Okay.
when it was just my own journaling project, he was fine with it. And then one day when it really was shaping into a manuscript, and I was like, "Hey, I actually think I might want to publish this because I think it could help other people. There's a
Yeah.
lot of people going through hard things." And I think he wrestled with that. But we finally did come to he finally read it and said, okay, so yes, that is out in the world. Yeah.
Yeah, I was going to ask if his voice was in the book at all, or it really is your personal journey.
It is my personal journey with, obviously conversations between us. And, the interesting thing when, you have a patient and a caregiver, which I think spouses, become that for each other, right? The patient
Hmm.
and the caregiver. What the patient remembers and what the caregiver remembers are two very different things. My husband ended up having a heart attack, multiple hospitalizations, open heart surgery, flatlined once for 7 minutes. I mean, just all kinds of things.
Wow.
Well, those are all things that I vividly lived that
Yeah.
he does not remember, right? So he actually read the book, and when he got through, he was like, wow, I really wish this book was about somebody else. But he was really reading it and living it almost for the first time, because with anesthesia and all those things, you don't remember what's happening. Whereas the people in your life, the people who love you, have watched you go through all those things. And it's a different experience for them than it is for you. But then he has his own challenges living it and worrying about it every day. So.
Yeah. Wow, that's something I've never thought of, in that being two different memories essentially of the same experience.
Yeah, and I think that's why I also, I stopped reading a lot of fiction or medical mysteries were not what I wanted to read anymore. I
Yeah.
was living a medical mystery, or you'd be watching, even on Netflix, you'd be watching something and the person's having a heart attack and you're like, yeah, no,
Yep.
I,
Too
I don't want to
rich.
watch this. I don't want it. Too
Yep.
close to home. Stop. No more Grey's Anatomy for me. So yeah.
Yeah. It's amazing how that can happen. I have a hard time reading books at this point of my life about young children, that something happens to the young
Yes.
child. And like you said, I think just because I have small children myself, and I'm like, I can't read about something bad happening to them. I
Yes.
don't even want to let my brain go there.
Exactly. I don't want to stay at night, up at night thinking about that. So,
Yeah. Yeah. Well,
yeah.
I think this is a great segue to talk a little bit about who you are as a reader. So,
Well, I've been reading. I grew up in El Paso, Texas, and I have vivid memories of my mother taking us to the public library every
okay.
Saturday to walk up the stone steps to the children's section and pick out our books. So I think I started very early that was the big thing to look forward to, getting my own library card at 6 years
Yes.
old, so that I could read, I think, all the Marguerite Henry books. I'm laughing right now that that the movie's out. Are You There, God? It's Me, Margaret. Like, so
Yep.
remember reading that book with my friends. So I don't know. I think I've always used books to escape, to learn, to find out things I didn't know. I love reading. So.
Yeah, it sounds like even in your what we've talked about earlier in the episode, just you've learned so much through books in different facets of your life.
Yes, and I have a writer studio in my house, and the shelves are almost categorized, almost by times in my life. Like there's a shelf, a wide shelf that has all kind of my nonprofit books, my favorite ones that were telling me about that. I have books that, talk about, health and healing. I do still have my favorite fiction books and fiction authors, but yeah, they're almost categorized by time points in my life.
Oh, that's perfect. So, what type of books are you reading now?
So I dove deep into the inspirational nonfiction phase. So that is a lot of what I read and spend my time reading, authors that I love the way that they explain life to people. Those are my favorite authors right now.
Yeah. Well, I'm already thinking I'm part of a book club with a few friends, and this is books that we like to read. So I will be taking up your recommendations probably to our
Good,
group and being like, when are we going to pick these up?
good. I hope
So
you do.
I
So
love reading them in a group setting. because I feel like when I read them, right, I have a conversation between, well, a one-sided, but the author and me, and it's this very internal conversation. But when we take it to this small group, I'm able to apply it to my life more, I think, because we talk about it. And again, you're saying it to yourself a second time and you're
Yeah.
helping it make more sense. And then it's even stickier inside of you to be something you might apply to your life or a way you might think of or approach a situation.
Yes, and
And
everyone's bringing in their own experiences.
yes.
They think about it in different ways. So even I'm part of a book club, and a fiction book we read recently was called Horse by Geraldine Brooks.
Okay.
And there was something in the ending. I loved the book. I loved the structure. She had all these characters and wove it. And there was something in the end that I just didn't even understand. I thought, what does this even mean? And it
Yeah.
was talking about this crazy museum in Australia, and it didn't even think that it was real. Yet someone in my book club had lived in Australia, and this it was a real
Wow.
place, and it completely changed the ending of the book for me. I mean, I was putting the book down thinking, why did she end it that way? That made no sense. And here was someone in my book club who had direct experience with this museum and explained the whole situation that completely changed how I saw the book and saw the ending. So I do think when you are in community and discussing books, people can bring in their own experiences that will change things for the way we look at life or how we look at even a book. So
Yeah, I love what you're saying there because I've thinking I have a few books that came to mind as you were saying that where I maybe ended it and I'm like, yeah, I didn't love that. And then but you talk about it like, well, then I liked it more because I understood more. So, okay. Well, and then you have so graciously prepared a book flight for us today.
yes, I know. I love the idea of your podcast that this is how introduce readers to new authors and new ideas and new books. I love this idea of a book flight. So.
Yeah, and I've said it on the episodes before, but there's so many wonderful books out there. So I just viewed this
Oh,
as we have so little time to read great books, but let's have some trusted sources come on and tell us the books that we should read and help us navigate the waters of so many wonderful reads out there.
it's a great idea, and I love that you created this podcast.
Yay, well, thank you. So, what is your book flight about today?
So book flight for me is the kind of the three authors that when I was really struggling and trying to find answers, who I really looked to as guides. And as I was preparing this book flight, I realized that with each author, there's actually three books that kind of a sub flight to the flight. So
Okay.
um the first author is Barbara Brown Taylor. If you don't know her, she wrote one of my favorite books is Learning to Walk in the Dark.
Okay.
She was actually, this book was on the cover of Time magazine in 2014.
Oh,
It's not happened to a lot of authors. It certainly does not happen to a lot of inspirational nonfiction authors.
yeah.
But she
Wow.
was also named one of the 100 most influential people in that year, alongside Beyonce and Pope Francis. So, I mean,
Wow.
she is an, she is an unbelievable author, probably the most incredible author anyone's never heard of, right? But
Okay.
she lives a very quiet life in Georgia. And I think that's also why I love her, is because there's so much pressure on authors these days to be on book
Yeah.
TikToks and out in social media and doing and Barbara Brown Taylor just quietly writes some of the best books you might never have heard of in Georgia, and puts out great ideas and great content very quietly without social media. So
Yeah. That's amazing.
Learning to Walk in the Dark is kind of about finding faith in dark times when it's hard.
Yeah.
She also wrote a book called An Altar in the World, which is finding sacred in the everyday.
Love
And
that.
she wrote a book called Holy Envy, finding God in the faith of others. So it's a complete spiritual compendium of all different kinds of religions: Buddhism, Hinduism, Sufism, Judaism, and she's an Episcopal priest herself. And so
Okay.
she had left the church and was teaching religion and taught this religious survey course, and the Holy Envy is about that. So you really get to see all the world religions and take pieces and parts and understand them in a way that you might not have. So, but I
Yeah.
think if you start with one Barbara Brown Taylor book, it would be Learning to Walk in the Dark, especially if you're going through anything difficult in your life. I don't know, it's a masterclass. So
Yeah. Oh, I'm definitely going to have to pick that up. And also, I'm thinking that Alter in the World, I don't know if
yeah.
it's about this, but I feel like some days you're kind of mired in parenthood, right? And just the busyness of that. But finding that, the simple and everyday would be a great message for my world right now.
Yes, no, it's great. And, like she was an Episcopal priest for 7 years and part of a big church. And she also wrote a book called Leaving Church. And, it was the idea that she wasn't finding God in the pew and in the place. And so she ended up really searching and finding a different kind of spirituality. So
Yeah.
anyway,
Oh,
great. I've met her before, and she really is just, when you read her on the page, you think, oh my gosh, I just want to sit and talk with her, and you do. She is exactly like her books. So just very written in very simple, plain language. It's not a lot of um, certainty and shoulds. It's a very open-ended invitation to spirituality. So I really love her writing and her work.
yeah. And I've heard that she is the narrator on her Learning to Walk in the Dark. She reads her own book as the audio book,
Oh,
and that it's absolutely fantastic because she's
well,
reading it.
I've not listened to it. That would probably make me want to re-listen to it because I only recently started doing audiobooks. And if I
Okay.
really love a book, I'll get both. I'll get the audiobook and listen to it, and then I'll have a hard copy that I can underline my favorite passages. So I did not know that about this book. So
Yeah.
I'm thinking I'm gonna be walking to that one this summer. It does have a beautiful voice.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
that's what he said. He's like, it was just absolutely mesmerizing
Yeah.
listening to her read this book.
Yeah, and she still preaches. So she does have this really kind of soothing,
Yeah.
calming, you know, presence. So,
Okay.
okay, well, you just taught
Well,
me something back. I can't wait.
yay. Okay, so that was Barbara Brown Taylor. We'll have Learning to Walk with the Dark as our official book flight. And then, listeners, don't worry, I'll have all the books listed in the show notes for the sub book flight of that one.
Yeah.
What's the second book of our pairing?
The second one is Kate Bowler, Everything Happens and Other Lies I've Loved. And so if you don't know Kate Bowler, she has a great podcast called Everything Happens.
Okay.
She's written several books, but starting with Everything Happens and Other Lies I've Loved, she's a New York Times bestselling author, podcaster. She's a professor at Duke Divinity School,
Okay.
and she calls herself an incurable optimist. And she was someone who was diagnosed with stage 4 cancer. And
Wow.
so, again, had to figure out, well, gosh, what does this mean? Here
Yeah.
I am, I'm a divinity professor. I thought I was living this really, kind of good, I put that in air quotes, good life. And how does someone like me get cancer? And she had a young son, and she worried about, leaving him
Wow.
without a mom. So kind of in her same thing, in her own struggle to make sense of her world. She wrote this book, and then she's continued to write in this vein. Her podcast, she interviews people who are going through hard things. So I've listened to and walked to her podcast so many times, especially when we've been dealing with my husband's disease for 10 years, but it just made me feel better to
Oh,
listen to
yeah.
other people who were dealing with hard things and still walking around and being an incurable optimist despite things. And so she has great guests on her podcast. She also has a book called No Cure for Being Human, which I think is a fantastic title.
Okay.
And she has a new book out called The Lives We Actually Have 100 Blessings for, hard times. So
Yeah.
she just writes in this very wise and funny way. It is sometimes books about serious subjects like dying could be very, you know, um, pessimistic or gloomy, and she's the opposite. I mean, they're funny, they're and it's full of wisdom and practicality. And so I'm a huge Kate Bowler fan.
Yeah. I'm going to have to check out her podcast. It's amazing when you read something and just how you get that glimmer of hope when you know you are not the only one dealing with these same issues.
Yes, yes, and she's Canadian, so she has a little bit of a funky accent, so it's every once in a while, so she's, again, her voice is great to listen to as well. I'm pretty sure she reads her own audiobooks too.
Okay. All right. Yes. In the busyness of life right now, I do a lot of audiobooks when I'm folding laundry or doing
Me
dishes and
too. I was listening to a book last night as I chopped carrots or something. Yeah, I mean, I come in from a walk where I'm listening. It's like, oh, I don't want to turn off the chapter yet. So you like follows you into the house and into the kitchen. So yeah,
yeah.
I'm a fan of audiobooks as well.
Yes,
So
I'm like I do so much more cleaning when I'm listening. I'm like pleasantly distracted.
I know, right? So yeah, it'll really take time folding my shirts and laundry because I'm listening to a good book. Yeah.
Yes. Okay. So that was Kate Bowler.
Mhm.
Everything Happens and Other Lies I've Loved. I
Yeah.
love that book title too. That's
I
a
know. Well, that's what I'm saying. She's such a mixture of just, she's kind of like your wisest, funniest best friend, to just say, look, it's going to be okay,
yeah.
So, yeah, I love
Okay. All right. And that's a new author to me too. I'm not familiar with her. So thank you for
her.
sharing that.
Yeah, she's and I think she has 7 books. But in your short flight, I just gave you
Yeah.
3.
Thank you.
Yes. And then Father Greg Boyle, Tattoos on the Heart. If you're not familiar with Father Greg Boyle, he's a priest and in California, who was working in a really tough parish in LA, and he was so dismayed by all um, the gang activity and the shootings and everything that was happening, and people just feeling hopeless about their lives.
Yeah.
In 1988, he founded something called Homeboy Industries. It's the largest and most successful gang intervention and rehabilitation program in the world.
Wow.
He, Homeboy, what it does is it allows, it's a place of belonging for people. So his premise was people join gangs because they need a place to belong, and a gang is giving them, for better or for worse, a
Yeah.
place. So what if we gave them a different place to belong? And it comes not only with the belonging, but also with employment. And so Homeboy Industries has all of these social enterprises. There's a t-shirt business. There's you know, so many things, a bakery, books, like all kinds of things where he offers employment, and people come in from different gangs, from rival gangs. And
Wow.
they're working together side by side, and he offers tattoo removal and things to really help people leave gang life and have a different way of belonging. And so Tattoos on the Heart is the power of boundless compassion is the subtitle to that one. So not only helping you understand the gang life, but why someone might be drawn to that, how he started Homeboy Industries, great stories from the people
Wow.
who've come in. He's been given the California Peace Prize and named a White House Champion of Change. The guy is just legendary. He also wrote Barking to the Choir, which is the power of radical kinship. And his newest one is The Whole Language, the power of extravagant tenderness. And he reads his own audiobooks, and I especially The Whole Language. That's his newest one. He reads that one, and it's so great because if you were reading the page, you would never. He does like voice impressions of some of his own voice. So he'll be like, "Hey, essay," it
Yeah.
breaks into character and then back to himself. So again, that one is like wise and funny at the same time. But he really, his view on life, on how every problem, if we could just solve it instead of an us and them mentality, as a we, and
Yeah.
we belong to each other, and we all rise together, we all fall together. And I just love the way he thinks about life and who our neighbor is and how we should love that neighbor. So I just think
Yeah.
he's a giant inspiration on how we all should live this life.
Yeah. That's The Whole Language. That
Mhm.
one. Because that sounds like what I've been really trying to teach my children along the way, right? Of like, because it just seems like we're keep going down this road of this division and we're all so different. And I'm like, I think, oh yeah, we might have other ideas about things, but we're more similar than we are different at the end of the day. But
Exactly.
it's like we hook on to this. We're so different in this one belief, and then you automatically cancel the
Yes.
person. And we're really, I think, doing ourselves a disservice in doing that.
Yeah. And if these guys can find ways to come together and stop shooting each other day to
Yeah.
day, certainly can't we all find ways to come together on much smaller, easier issues.
Yeah.
So He really, I think Father Greg's work should probably be required reading for humans. Just
Yeah.
his deep experience, his amazing stories, the way he took one of the hardest problems to solve and solved it. And
Yeah.
he, you've ever listened to he doesn't have a podcast. He's been on a lot of podcasts. So I've listened to a lot of interviews with him. And he always is just, I don't know, your wisest, kindest grandfather,
Yeah.
smartest sage voice you ever want to listen to. So.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. These are all books I'm definitely going to be picking up. So this is Father Greg Boyle. We'll go with Tattoos on the Heart. And I've been thinking, as you've been chatting, about a dessert pairing for you as a little gift for coming on the show.
Oh, good.
So I have two books that came to mind. One is, have you heard of On Fire? I've talked about it on the show a lot.
On fire. No,
Okay, by
Well,
John O'Leary.
no,
Okay, so this one, it kind of goes along your vein of the whispers and listening
Yeah.
to them. Or the other book that I'm thinking of for you is The Prison Angel.
No, this is
And
good. I love it.
okay, so would you like me to I can expand on one of them for you if you'd like.
Yes.
So this is more of a memoir about a woman that lived here where I live, well, kind of Beverly Hills, and she saw the issues and just the utter depravity in the Tijuana prison. And so it's her story of trying to go down to Tijuana and help these prison inmates down there.
Oh my gosh, I love it. And I mentioned earlier that grew up in El Paso, Texas, which is a
Okay.
border with Juarez, Mexico. And so that is deeply imprinted in my heart right now as we see all the, issues at the border and
Yeah.
immigration. And you just think, oh my gosh, what can one person do to help solve for that? So that will be a summer read for me. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, she is she actually had raised a family. Her name was Mary Clark, and she had raised a family, and I think they had maybe 3 or 4 children. Um it was not a great marriage, but she started with bringing clothes down to the Tijuana prison and then just realized, kind of similar to your story, of that there was a much bigger problem going on than just bringing these people clothes.
Right.
And what could she do about it? And she was I can't remember if she was related to Hollywood or her family was related to Hollywood, but she had a pretty influential circle. So she started raising funds and raising money, but she was thinking that wasn't enough. And so she goes to live in this prison in Tijuana.
You are kidding.
No, she
Oh my
goes,
God.
yeah.
I can't wait. We're gonna be hanging up and I'm gonna be ordering it on Amazon. Thank you.
So she goes, she lives in this prison because she wanted to bring faith to these people and humanity. And it's one of the most dangerous prisons in the world, I believe, that she goes and lives in. As all there's drug trafficking, right, of the cat in Tijuana. And she puts herself, after many years of going down and doing this kind of more mission work where she was bringing things to the prison, she puts herself in the prison to bring faith. And she's many times she goes and tries to ask the Catholic Church to become a sister, to become a nun, but she was divorced. And so she's being denied by the church, but eventually she does get there. So you could read the
Wow.
book and how that happens. But yeah, it
Well,
was an incredible story.
as you were talking, I was reminded of there's a quote by Father Greg Boyle, just because he loves to remind people that, while you might originally be going to do something for someone else, what really happens is
Yes.
you are changed, right? And so he says, you don't go to the margins to transform others, you go to the margins to be transformed.
Yeah.
And just that understanding that yeah, it's not about the clothes, it's not about the soup, there's bigger issues, which changes how you see a problem, which changes what you're willing to do about it, and then you can never unsee it.
Yeah.
So what are you going to do? Well, I guess some people become nuns. That's not
Yeah.
but yeah, it was just admirable at the most, but yeah, just even in the little ways that working alongside someone for change ultimately changes you. And that's really the bigger point and the bigger reason to do it. If not, how will you fix somebody, but how will you be changed? So.
Yeah. So I think as you've been talking through your episode, that was the book that was kind of pinging in. I was like, I think that would be a really great fit
Oh my gosh, I'm
with
so
this.
glad you told me about it. I never heard about it. Maybe, it's one of those things because it's your part of the world. It's everyone knows about it here, but here I am on the other side of the country, never heard of it. So,
And I
and it's
don't know that. I just had a friend recommend it to me. She's like, hey, I think you would love this. It talks so much about this area where we're living. And she's from a military family as well. But she was like, I just loved the story and I think you would too. So I don't know how popular it is, but it ended up in my lap via a recommendation as well. So
sometimes that's it, right? It's the book that you're meant to read at that time. So.
yeah. Absolutely. Well, I think this has been a fantastic conversation about our book flight, but let's finish with our bonus pairings, which are just the speed round of questions here.
Yes.
So, where is your favorite place to read?
In my little writer studio, I have a certain chair, and that's where I read and write, and I'm usually there every morning.
Love it. So, you have a set time in your day that you're writing?
I do. I call
Okay.
it my golden hour. And anyone who's trying to write or create, I would encourage them to find your golden hour. For me, it's probably anywhere from 5:30 to 8 in the morning. And I don't set my alarm. I just wake up and find myself. I don't turn on the lights. I stay in the dark, get my tea, sit in my chair, and either I'm writing that morning or I'm reading that morning. But it's kind of my quiet time, kind of like you when you do your podcasting and when you're recording is that early morning before your kids wake up. Same thing for me. I try to read and write early in the morning before the world wakes up.
Yeah. I've always loved this part of the day because there's a quietness to it that I feel like the evening hours don't have.
I agree. I love it.
Yeah. Okay. And then we've already answered what is one book that has changed your life.
Yeah, I think if I quit my job and raise money, that one pretty much, that would be it.
Yeah. Okay. What is one book you've read that has intimidated you?
Yeah, I think Sue Monk Kidd, The Book of Longings. I loved that book. And as I was reading that as a writer, I kept thinking the research she had to do to create this book, to understand it. Some of her characters have these really intricate conversations.
Okay.
And I think, gosh, what did she have? She had to know so much to write both sides of that conversation, both from a historical perspective, from a theological perspective. I am wowed by that book. And also it's audacious. It's the book is about a woman in biblical times who wanted to be a scholar and write, which was not allowed. But even beyond that, it was imagining if Jesus had a wife.
Yeah.
And the book is about Jesus's wife, which, I think some people have really, called her a heretic for, even though it's fiction, writing that book. So I think it took bravery. I think it's just really smart and well written. And so, yeah, I'm kind of intimidated and awed and wowed by that book.
Yeah, I've had this one on my TBR. I just have not picked it up, but now I'm going to read it with your insight as a writer, right? Of like how she put those two sides together to be able to write the dialogue.
It's a great audiobook.
Okay.
I listened to it in the pandemic. I remember just long, gray, rainy days where there was nothing going on, and I was listening to it, and it's a good audiobook. Yeah, okay. I love the person who read it, which is not her, but yeah.
Oh, awesome. I'm going to go library hold. Yes, absolutely. And then are you a rereader?
Hardly ever. Okay. Although now I might be a re-listener, right?
Okay.
Like about learning to walk in the dark is an audio. Then I'm going to re-listen. What I do is I mark up a book all the time, and then on my shelves are the books that, I have hundreds of books on my shelves, but I only keep them if I can look at the spine and remember why I wanted that book. Otherwise, it's time to give it away. So I can pull a book out, remember why I wanted it, flip to where I underlined it. I'll do that, but I probably never sit and reread a book.
Yeah, I'm the same, and I don't keep many books because we move so frequently as part of it. But
it's heavy.
Yeah,
books are heavy. It's a heavy hobby. This book.
Yes, yeah. I love giving them. But as I'm reading, I love thinking about what friend would love this book, and then. Most often than not, it's because I'm mailing it to them because now we've moved away from whoever it is I'm thinking about. So,
Yes.
Yeah. And then lastly, what are you reading next?
Up next is Covenant of Water, Abraham Verghese.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
And I've loved him. He has an El Paso connection. He was a doctor in El Paso.
Okay.
And he wrote a book called The Tennis Partner. And he played tennis with my father, who died 26 years ago. And so
Wow.
I've always had a love for Abraham Verghese and his writing. He
Okay.
wrote Cutting for Stone, which I loved. When that book
Yeah.
ended, that was one I just wanted to start over the minute I finished it. And so when I heard he had written a new one, I ordered it. It's so thick. I don't know if you've seen it,
I have
but
not. I've heard of it, but
it's like 723 pages. And so even before Oprah picked it as her next pick, I wanted it. I had it on my up next reading. So anyway, I'm really glad for him. He's a beautiful writer. He's, a great doctor and humanitarian. So I'm glad that his book is having such success. So can't wait to read it.
yes, yeah. This is also on my TBR because Cutting for Stone was a fantastic book.
Right? I loved that book.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for coming on the show today. I know your time is precious, and I appreciate all that you've given me.
Oh, well, you gave me back, and I'm going to be ordering The Prison Angel right now. So thank
Yay.
you.
You are very welcome. Thank you so much for listening to my conversation today with Katie Izard. Her book flight today focuses on inspirational nonfiction. We'd love to hear what other books you would pair with this book flight at bookishflights.com. That is also where you can find more information on today's flight and any other books that we talked about today. I want to inspire a community of readers. So whenever you share a post about what you are reading or what you are picking up next, especially if you have heard about the book on the show, please tag us. Follow us on Facebook or Instagram at Bookish Flights. This is a brand new show, so if you enjoyed it, please head over to Apple Podcasts and give the show a review. Your review not only helps me, but it also helps the show reach others. Make sure you are subscribed on Apple Podcasts or Spotify to make sure that you will not miss an episode. That's it for this episode. Thank you so much for listening. As Emma Thompson said, I think books are like people in the sense that they'll turn up in your life when you most need them. Cheers to you, dear readers. Until next time.